So I want to start today's deep dive with a quote. And, well, it's a bit of a harsh one.
Oh boy. Okay, let's hear it.
Quote, "Don't lift too heavy, your vagina will fall out."
Oh wow. Yeah, that's quite the internet comment right there.
Right. It was actually left on a video of a female weightlifter who was, pulling a really heavy deadlift. And on the surface, it sounds like pure internet hyperbole, just trolling that you normally completely ignore.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of comment you just want to scroll right past.
Exactly. But we're bringing it up today because, surprisingly, it actually highlights this hidden physiological collision. And our mission for you, the listener, in today's deep dive is to look at a huge stack of sources. We're talking sports science research, medical guidelines, physiotherapy reports,
Yeah.
to answer a really specific question.
Which is, can your weightlifting technique actually affect vaginal laxity and, well, pelvic floor symptoms?
Yes, exactly. Because female participation in heavy lifting is just skyrocketing right now. I mean, nearly half of USA weightlifting members are women.
Which is amazing, by the way. I mean, for metabolic health, for bone density, getting away from just those tiny pink dumbbells is a huge win.
Huge win. But alongside all those broken records, there's this silent epidemic of structural failure. So we're going to explore why elite athletes are, surprisingly, actually more prone to leaks, and how the exact way you manage internal pressure can either protect or, fundamentally compromise your anatomy.
Yeah, because it really is a quiet crisis. As the loads on the barbell get heavier, we're seeing a massive prevalence of symptoms that female athletes are just, they're often too embarrassed to report. So we really have to look at the intersection of biomechanics and female anatomy to understand what's physically happening under that heavy load.
Right, and to understand those biomechanics, I feel like we first need to visualize the equipment we're actually working with inside the body.
Definitely. The anatomical baseline.
Yeah, so we're talking about the pelvic floor, and the sources describe this as a group of muscles, like the levator ani, that essentially form a hammock at the base of your pelvis.
Hammock is a good word, yeah. Or even think of it like the tension cables on a suspension bridge. This muscular bridge sits right at the base and has the massive biological job of holding up the bladder, the uterus, and the bowel.
So it's supporting a lot of weight even before you pick up a barbell.
Exactly. And those tension cables are constantly working against gravity. They operate on this sort of dynamic break and release system. Like when you need to use the bathroom, the cables slacken. But when you need to hold it, or, if you cough or jump, they tense up to maintain structural integrity.
Okay, so what happens when that suspension bridge starts to lose that integrity?
Well, that's when we see the onset of vaginal laxity, which is basically a feeling of looseness or decreased tension.
And the sources show this laxity rarely just happens in isolation, right?
No, almost never. It's usually accompanied by urinary incontinence, which is, involuntary leakage, or in more severe cases, pelvic organ prolapse.
Where the organs actually start to descend.
Right, because the cables literally can no longer hold the weight. They just give out.
Wow. And, there's this assumption that these issues only happen to postpartum women or maybe postmenopausal women. But the data in our sources tells a totally different story.
It really does. It's kind of shocking.
Yeah, there's this one Norwegian study that found that female athletes are actually 3 times more likely to leak than women who are mostly sedentary.
3 times more likely. Just let that sink in.
And then another study looked specifically at elite female powerlifters and weightlifters. It found that 41.7% reported urinary incontinence.
Almost half.
Right, and 23% were dealing with prolapse symptoms. So I want to use an analogy here to explain this, this load tolerance issue. Think of your body like a crane lifting a 125-kilo barbell.
Okay, I like this.
If the crane lifts more than it's rated for, the absolute weakest link in the chain is going to snap. Now, sometimes that weak link is your grip or maybe your lower back rounds, but for a massive percentage of women, that weakest link is the pelvic floor.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Experiencing laxity or leakage during a heavy lift doesn't mean your body is broken. It simply means you've exceeded your current load tolerance for that specific region.
Right, because you might have the hamstring strength to pull the weight.
Exactly. Your glutes and hamstrings might easily handle 125 kilos, but your pelvic floor muscles just haven't adapted to handle the immense internal pressure that comes with that effort.
Okay, internal pressure. That is the phrase we really need to focus on next. Because the load isn't just the physical iron plates pushing down on your skeleton.
No, not at all. It's the pressure your body generates inside to actually move that iron.
Yeah, the literature focuses really heavily on intra-abdominal pressure, or IAP. Let's visualize the core as a sealed canister. So you've got the diaphragm on top like a lid, the abdominals wrapping around the sides, and the pelvic floor is the base.
Right, it's a sealed system.
So when you lift, the pressure inside that canister just spikes exponentially.
And we should clarify, that intra-abdominal pressure is totally non-negotiable for heavy resistance training. You need it.
Because it acts like an airbag.
Yeah, it provides trunk stiffness. It stabilizes the lumbar spine so you can transfer force from your legs to the barbell without, snapping your spine in half. You literally cannot safely lift heavy weights without generating IAP. The real danger, the critical variable, is how that pressure is directed.
Okay, so this brings me to something that I found super confusing in the sources. There's this massive contradiction about how pressure is managed.
The Valsalva maneuver.
Yes. Okay, so trainers tell lifters you have to use the Valsalva maneuver to safely lift heavy. But then you read the urogynecology guidelines, and doctors use the Valsalva maneuver to intentionally push the pelvic organs out of place as a medical test.
I know, it sounds crazy.
Isn't that a massive problem? We have coaches telling athletes to do the exact maneuver that doctors use to force a prolapse.
It sounds like a total contradiction, but it really comes down to a naming issue. They are using the exact same word for two entirely different physical actions.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, in weightlifting, when a coach says Valsalva, they really mean abdominal bracing. The lifter takes a deep breath, holds it, closing the glottis, which just means shutting your vocal cords so air can't escape.
Right.
But the key is that in a proper lift, that pressure is directed outward. You expand your abdominal wall in 360 degrees. You're creating uniform stiffness across the whole canister.
Okay, but the medical Valsalva is totally different.
Completely different. In urogynecology, it's highly directional. The doctor asks the patient to close their glottis and actively bear down. They are intentionally driving all that internal pressure straight down into the pelvic floor to see if those suspension bridge cables give way.
Oh, wow. So the danger is when an athlete accidentally performs the medical Valsalva on the lifting platform.
Exactly. A lifter gets under a heavy squat, takes a massive breath, and instead of bracing outward in 360 degrees, they basically push down like a piston directly onto the levator ani.
So they're forcing those hammock muscles to bear the entire brunt of the core's internal pressure plus the weight of the barbell.
Right. And that downward piston effect is what directly forces the stretch and strain, leading to vaginal laxity and prolapse symptoms over time.
Okay, but that raises a huge question. If bad technique acts like a downward piston, why do some women lift with just terrible mechanics and never leak or feel anything, while others develop severe laxity?
That is the million-dollar question. And to answer it, we have to look at the baseline structural integrity of those tension cables before the lifter even steps foot in the gym.
Right, the underlying vulnerabilities. And our sources point to two major physiological events that alter this baseline strength: childbirth and menopause.
Yeah, let's talk about childbirth first. The physical demands of a vaginal delivery on the levator ani are just extreme. During delivery, the baby's head stretches this muscle group up to 250% of its original length.
Wait, 250%? That's incredible.
It really is. I mean, for context, a normal skeletal muscle in the human body usually faces severe injury or complete tearing if it's stretched past just 150%.
Wow. So it's being pushed so far beyond its elastic limit.
Right.
Going back to our analogy, it's like a rubber band or a suspension cable. If it's been stretched that severely, it doesn't just instantly snap back to its original tension.
No, it doesn't. The micro tears heal, but the sources show this extreme stretching often causes what's called a wider levator hiatus. That's the actual opening in the pelvic floor. The geometric structure of the bridge is just fundamentally changed.
And that new geometry means it can't act as a rigid base anymore. So there's this new baseline of laxity.
Exactly. And then we have to factor in menopause and perimenopause, which alter the actual physical material of those cables.
Right, because of estrogen.
Yeah. Estrogen receptors are densely packed all throughout the pelvic floor muscles and the vaginal canal. These receptors regulate the production of collagen. And collagen, as we know, is what gives tissue its elasticity and strength.
So as estrogen drops during menopause, collagen synthesis plummets right along with it.
Exactly. The physical material of the bridge basically thins out and loses its elasticity. And this happens regardless of how fit you are or how much you exercise.
That context is so vital because it means that heavy weightlifting is rarely the actual root cause of vaginal laxity.
Right. The physiotherapy guidelines are very clear about this. They classify heavy lifting as an aggravator.
An aggravator, meaning the barbell doesn't break the bridge on its own.
No, it just exposes the underlying laxity that was already there. From that 250% stretch during childbirth or the severe collagen depletion from menopause, the heavy lifting just brings the issue to the surface.
Okay, so if lifting exposes the vulnerability, I'm sure a lot of people listening are thinking, well, shouldn't I just stop lifting, just hang up the lifting belt?
Oh, absolutely not. That is the worst thing you could do.
Right, treating a symptom by creating a much bigger disease. Because if you abandon resistance training, especially as you age, the metabolic costs are huge.
Massive. The medical consensus across all these sources is emphatic. Keep lifting. If you stop, you're looking at accelerated bone density loss, sarcopenia, which is muscle loss, and overall metabolic decline. Those are way more dangerous than managing pelvic floor symptoms.
And there's no clinical evidence saying that heavy lifting causes permanent damage if you manage your biomechanics correctly.
Exactly. The solution isn't to stop. The solution is technique modification and targeted rehab.
So how do we actually do that? How do athletes modify their technique so they can keep the bar loaded without pushing their pelvic organs down?
Well, the physiotherapy sources highlight a very specific timing trick. It's called the knack.
The knack. I love that name.
Yeah, it's pretty catchy. Basically, instead of just bracing and passively hoping your pelvic floor holds up against that massive pressure, the knack requires you to intentionally draw up and tighten your pelvic floor muscles before you initiate the lift.
So you manually engage the tension cables before you take your breath and unrack the bar.
Right. You're pre-tensioning the system. You take the slack out of the bridge before the heavy traffic hits. But beyond just pre-tensioning, you also have to modify how you manage the pressure canister itself. And the guidelines recommend something called sub-threshold training.
Okay, subthreshold training. That means stripping the weight off the bar, right?
Yeah, you drop the weight down to a level where you don't leak and you don't feel any dragging or heaviness in your pelvis. You have to find the exact load rating your internal bridge can currently handle.
Okay, and then you change your breathing.
Exactly. Instead of holding your breath against a closed glottis, that Valsalva brace, you exhale on exertion.
So breathing out during the hardest part of the lift?
Yes. Because when you breathe out, you create an escape valve for all that intra-abdominal pressure. It prevents it from driving downward like a piston.
That makes total sense.
Right.
It lets the lifter keep building strength in their glutes and their back without constantly overwhelming the pelvic floor.
Exactly.
But I have to ask, what about these elite powerlifters? We are talking about women who squat hundreds of pounds. Their overall musculature is incredibly strong. Why would an athlete with that much explosive power need to drop the weight to an empty bar to do tiny pelvic floor exercises?
It does seem totally counterintuitive, doesn't it? But we have to look at how the nervous system actually coordinates movement.
Okay.
The pelvic floor is primarily a reflexive muscle group. Elite lifters aren't leaking because their pelvic floor is inherently weak. They leak because of a neuromuscular timing
A
deficit.
timing deficit.
Yeah, so imagine an elite athlete initiating a max squat. Their brain sends these massive instant signals to the big global muscles, the quads, the glutes, the abs.
Right, fire everything.
Exactly, but the signal to the local stabilizing muscles, the pelvic floor, it lags. It's just a fraction of a millisecond too late.
Oh, wow. So the big muscles fire, the pressure spikes instantly, and the pelvic floor tenses up just a millisecond too late to absorb the shock.
Exactly. The piston drives down before the bridge is actually ready to catch it. That timing error is what causes the structural failure. They have immense brute strength, but they lack that reflexive coordination.
That is fascinating. So it's not about being weak, it's about being uncoordinated at the reflex level.
Yes, and that is exactly why supervised pelvic floor muscle training, or PFMT, is considered the gold standard treatment here.
And we should clarify, PFMT is not just casually doing a few Kegels while you're stopped at a red light.
No, not at all. It's a highly structured protocol designed specifically to rewire that exact timing deficit.
And the success rate is huge. The sources show that with supervised PFMT doing about 10 to 15 reps daily, the symptom improvement rate is 74%.
74%. That is a massive success rate. And the protocol usually involves two distinct types of muscle activation.
Right. Long holds and short flicks.
Yes. Long, sustained holds build the structural endurance of the hammock, and then the short, explosive flicks train the nervous system to react instantaneously to those sudden spikes in pressure.
So you're literally systematically training your brain to fire the pelvic floor in perfect unison with your abdominals.
Exactly. And once your nervous system learns to anticipate that load, You can eventually transition back to the Valsalva brace,
Right.
directing the pressure outward 360 degrees with a fully tensioned pelvic floor perfectly supporting the base.
So distilling all this down for you, the listener, the overarching takeaway from this entire stack of medical and sports science literature is that your weightlifting technique absolutely dictates the health of your pelvic floor.
It really does.
If you manage your internal pressure by pushing it straight down like a piston, you are going to overwhelm tissues that might already dealing with the structural changes of childbirth or, the collagen loss from menopause. You're actively exposing the weakest link in the chain.
But the incredibly empowering part is that the female body is so adaptable. If you master that outward abdominal brace, use the knack to pre-tension your system and really train that neuromuscular timing, you can completely change how those internal loads are distributed.
Yeah. The barbell is not the enemy here. Currently managed pressure is.
Absolutely.
Which really leaves us with kind of a provocative thought to end on, something to mull over. Throughout this whole analysis, we've defined the human core anatomically as a canister, right? With the pelvic floor serving as its vital foundational base.
Right, the bottom of the canister.
Yet mainstream fitness has completely separated ab workouts from pelvic floor health. The industry treats a visible six-pack as the absolute pinnacle of core fitness, while treating the functional base of that exact same core as some sort of taboo postpartum medical issue.
Oh, that is such a good point. It's totally compartmentalized.
Right. Imagine the paradigm shift in women's long-term health if every single gym induction didn't just start with how to grip a dumbbell, but actually started with how to coordinate your breath with your pelvic floor. We might finally eliminate this archaic idea that lifting heavy inherently damages the female body, because with the right internal mechanics, that suspension bridge can hold the weight every single time.